You know, right, a podcast that uncovers the origin stories of some of the biggest names in media, sports, entertainment, and so much more. Nick Durst here along with Joe Calabrese, and Joe, today is one of those so much more episodes. Are you hungry, buddy?
I'm always hungry. We know you're always hungry, and very interesting. We've done over 200 episodes of this, and we've had people all across media, but we've never had a professional chef on with us. So this is going to be very, very unique. This is a first for us. I had the opportunity to meet her in person before we started this recording, and I can personally attest that the food that she cooked was outrageous. Very disappointed that you did not have the opportunity to eat in person with her, but hopefully that'll change one day soon. According to her website, now she's a cookbook author, a food writer, menu and recipe developer, professional chef, culinary consultant, a wannabe food photographer, and probably most important of all, she's a former certified public accountant. So we'll have the opportunity to pick her brain and ask her about that momentarily. So I want to make sure that I'm getting this right because when I met her in person, there was a specific way to say this. We welcome Michele Di Pietro, right,
Very,
to the
very,
program.
yes, very, very good. And thank you very much for inviting me on your show.
Michelle, of course, coming to us live from her kitchen, which is very good. Very well to see that. Michelle, we just got through the tax season here. Do you still do your own taxes?
No, in fact, despite being a CPA, I really never specialized in tax. My specialty was audit.
Gotcha.
But I definitely do not do my own taxes.
All right, fair enough. So when did you start to learn how to cook, and what was your experience like growing up just being around food in an Italian family?
Great question. And yes, I grew up in I guess, fairly traditional Italian-American family. My grandparents were immigrants at the turn of the century, and my mom was a stay-at-home mom. So I actually think I started cooking when I was like 5 years old.
Wow.
I mean, according to my mom, she says I was standing by her side at the stove learning how to make eggs. I kind of remember it a little bit, but I always tell people I always really loved to eat, and that hasn't changed. But I think that's probably why I always loved to cook. There was definitely that desire to eat and to cook. So I always loved to cook. I mean, I worked side by side with my mom. I had my grandmother that I cooked, made homemade pasta with, and gnocchi, and that was really great. And then I also had aunts. One aunt was on the Abruzzese side, and one aunt was on the Sicilian side. So I had experience learning and cooking with them as well. So there's always a lot of food. And I can't say we had like the big, huge Sunday dinners like, you hear about in the Italian neighborhoods, because I actually grew up in a Jewish neighborhood. So I think we were the only Italians on the block for sure. And while we had the traditional, pasta, et cetera, on Sunday, it wasn't like the gigantic group, but it was still fairly traditional. And the foods that we ate were always pretty traditional Italian American. A lot of, pasta and sauce, but also lots and lots of veggies. My mom's sister lived out in Vineland, New Jersey, which is really far south and in the middle of farmland. So we were always getting like bushels and bushels of greens and stuff right from the farm. So we always had a huge abundance of vegetables and had a salad every night with dinner, without fail. Green salad, basic.
Very nice, very nice. And I always tell Joe, he's trying to settle down here. Hopefully, he could find someone who loves to cook, because his mom was a great cook. He grew up around all the great foods. So we'll see, Joe.
Yeah, it's important to have that same interest for sure.
Michelle, is it sauce or is it gravy?
I knew, as soon as the word came out of my mouth, I knew one of you was going to jump on that. I grew up calling it gravy. My grandmom called it gravy. My aunts, my mom, everyone called it gravy. So for most of my life, it was macaroni and gravy on Sunday. And I think I might have mentioned this when we first met, when I was on that other show. My mom would say, "Oh, what should we have, long or short macaroni?" that was basically like the category. And then, oh, we'll have like spaghetti or we'll have rigatoni. Over the years of being in the industry, going to cooking school and working in the food service for many years, I kind of just started calling it sauce, because I'm not going to say gravy around a bunch of other foodie people who are not Italian. They just would not know what I'm talking about. But now, having moved back to New Jersey, South Jersey, outside of Philadelphia, and not working as directly in food service as I had been for so many years, I'm saying gravy a lot more now these days. So,
all right, fair enough, fair enough. So,
long explanation.
Joe alluded to this before, but you worked as a public accountant at a top New York City firm, Ernst Young, one of the big four. You earned your bachelor's in business administration from Georgetown, which was a very difficult school to get into, hard academic place. So talk us through that time in your life there when you wanted to pursue that career in accounting, and how it all kind of came to fruition for you going to school and then after school.
Sure. So, like I said, I always loved to cook growing up, but I was very into academics, and I was very into doing very well in school and getting the A and studying hard and achieving, accolades in academia. So I never really considered going into food as a career. It wasn't even an option for me. And I was always really into math. I thought about business. I wasn't like that much into science though. So I thought, okay, business sounds good. Once I was in a business program, then you have to eventually declare your major. And I was like, I like accounting. I'm good at accounting, and you can get a good job in accounting. So I became an accounting major as opposed to finance or marketing or business management. And it worked out for me. It was actually the big six back when I when I graduated college. But yeah, I actually had a few offers to choose from, and I was going to school in Washington, D.C. I grew up in South Jersey, never really spent much time in New York City. That just wasn't a place that we ever went to. So to get a job in New York City after college graduation, was a really, really big deal for me. And I think it was a big deal for my family as well. Like, wow, you're going to the big city, and moved there. And I moved into an apartment with one of my college roommates, and it was great. And I loved it. And it was a really great experience. I went I was a specialist in audit, not tax. And what was great about the job was I got experience and got to interact with like people at a very high level at the clients, from sometimes the CFO or below at a very young age. So, you learn a certain skill set. And the other thing that really honed in on my skill set was like the level of detail that was required to be a financial auditor. And just really being on top of everything, because you're basically putting your stamp of approval on another company's books. So that was great, but then it wasn't really that long before I realized my heart wasn't in what I was doing. And I mean, I tried. I got the Wall Street Journal. I'm like, I really think I should get the Wall Street Journal. This is something I should do. But people would come to visit me, and it's fun up in New York, and it's funny because instead of going to the museums, I would say like, oh my God, you got to check out this specialty Italian store. They have the best prepared food section. And this is before prepared foods was everywhere. So I was so in love with the specialty food markets that I like learned about in Manhattan, and this idea of prepared foods. But, you don't go to a place like Georgetown and then graduate with a bunch of loans and then go back and tell your Italian-American parents, I'm thinking about going to cooking school, Mom and Dad. Like that was a conversation I wasn't really prepared to have when I was, 23 or 24. So I had the opportunity to work internationally with my company. So I realized I was working for an international company. And so I pursued that program, and I got the opportunity to live and work in Geneva, Switzerland for 2 years, which was amazing. I actually applied to work in Milan because I had studied Italian recreationally. I am Italian. I figured Milan was the, business center of Italy. But they came back and they said, well, we don't have something for you at that level, at your level in Milan, but we have something for you in Geneva. And I'm like, okay, what language do they speak there? Which was French, and I didn't know a word of French. It ended up not mattering because I worked completely in English and with other expats. But that was really a life-defining experience for me. I wasn't really that into the job even at that point, but I was thinking like, okay, I will do this for 2 more years if I get the opportunity to live and work in Europe. And it was a time in my life, I was 25. I went over, worked a lot, but you also had a lot of vacation in Europe, and you could get more vacation like the more you worked. So it was an opportunity for me to travel and to really hone in on what I really wanted to do as the next step in my career. And having that experience gave me the courage when it was time to come back to the US to quit my job, move back in with my parents, and enroll in cooking school. So that's what I did when I was 27 years old.
So, what was the process like switching professions and ultimately deciding to start pursuing culinary arts?
It was a rough decision. It was a very difficult decision. I cut the cord pretty quickly though. I mean, I thought about it for a really long time. And, you know, I was out to lunch with one of my colleagues in public accounting who was I can still remember him saying to me, because I was talking to him about like, you know, I got accepted to these culinary schools and I'm not really sure if I should do this. It's such a risk. And he's like, well, Michele, you know, you usually regret the things that you don't do, not the things that you do. And I was like, you know what? You're so right. I'm 27 years old. I still have another, 35 years of working. I'm not going to keep doing this. And what I could still have the opportunity to try something else. I mean, I was still, you know, looking back now, I think like, God, I was so young at 27. Like, of course, why didn't I just, but it was very difficult for me. You know, my parents were totally supportive and I jumped right into cooking school. You know, I mean, I was not like an 18-year-old and most of the fellow students were very young, you know, 18 to 20, who had worked in restaurants already at that point for years. And I had never worked in a professional kitchen. I just knew that I wanted to be in the food business somehow. And I thought that going to cooking school was the best way for me to get there. I knew that restaurants weren't my calling. In fact, the idea of working the line made me like so nervous. I always thought like, well, let me go to cooking school, but I would love to maybe go into the specialty food business and maybe open up a special, you know, Italian specialty store, combine my business background with the food. That's kind of loosely what I was thinking when I went to cooking school, you know, and I didn't do that, but I did end up working in retail food for the same company for about 16 years. Small company called Whole Foods Market. You might have heard of it.
So, what was it like working for Whole Foods Market in various management roles and eventually founding and developing It's All About the Food?
I loved working for Whole Foods. So I started out working part-time while I was still in cooking school in one of the stores, actually in the town that I now live in, because I've actually moved back to New Jersey. It was a store that had just opened in South Jersey. Like I said, I was living at home with my parents, attending cooking school. I didn't know anything about the company because I had just moved back into the country from Switzerland. And they didn't really have a huge presence around here. You know, this was 1998. So this was a long time ago. And all I knew though is that they had a prepared foods department. So I'm like, I want to work there. You know, I started working part-time. And it was at a time when the store was growing in leaps and bounds. The company was growing leaps and bounds. And because I had this whole other skill set that I had developed being a CPA, you know, just the organization, the financial acumen, the right brain, left brain thing going on. Even though I really was just interested in the food because I had changed my whole career to work with food, I quickly kind of got pulled into helping out with the financials in the department and ordering and, you know, all the kind of business stuff that goes along with working in, you know, a grocery store. So that sort of led me, and then also training. And it turns out I had an affinity for developing recipes and an idea and, you know, new food ideas. So that kind of led me to the corporate side of Whole Foods. And I ended up becoming the regional, I guess at that time it was called a merchandiser. You know, I was on the prepared foods corporate team for the Mid-Atlantic region. And I quickly got swept up in opening up stores all throughout the Mid-Atlantic region, which was very huge at that point. I mean, it included Ohio, Pittsburgh, Atlanta, Kentucky, South Jersey, Philadelphia. So I was on the road for a long time until they eventually opened or developed a position, which was an R&D chef, research and development chef for the region. This is down in Maryland. At this point, I moved to Maryland. And I kind of moved into that job because, again, I ended up having this affinity. Anytime there was a culinary project on our team, I was the one that always like gravitated to it and worked on that. That eventually transitioned into getting me back up to New York 10 years, almost 10 years to the day after I had left to go off to Switzerland in my dream job, which was essentially akin to like a culinary director role. And then I did that for another 8 years. That was basically focused on developing culinary concepts such as mini restaurants and mini like food like stations in the stores, and working on region-wide culinary projects, everything from development, ideation, costing, training, working with marketing, working across different departments. I did that for a long time and I loved it so much. It really was something that was my dream job. But like all good things, at some point you realize I'm not going to retire in this job. It's time to move on. Unless, I guess the opportunity was not really present to continue to grow in my role in the region unless I wanted to move across the country. And I really didn't want to leave New York at the time. Left there, I went to work for a small startup / turnaround, which was actually a vegan organic food and juice company based in Manhattan. Very different. Not that different in the sense that, we had a lot of vegan food. We had a lot of all natural foods, obviously, at Whole Foods, but it was a very small company, and as a lot of small food companies, it got sold from one, private investment company to another. And then when it got sold, all of us in leadership got laid off the next day. So that was a very short, like 15, 16 months for me. At that point, I thought, okay, well, none of the jobs that were out there were really like speaking to me. And I was chatting with my former boss and I'm like, if I had the guts, I would just start my own company and start consulting. He's like, well, Michele, why don't you do that? He's like, no one's going to make a better food consultant than you. And I'm like, I don't know. I just didn't think that was something that I would ever do. I'm not going to do that. I'm not that person. But I did it. And I started It's All About the Food in September of 2015, I think, 2015. And I started, so then I went out on my own. That was yet another very terrifying moment in my journey.
Well, it's worked out for you, of course. Every step you've made has been the right one so far. Do you have any advice for people looking to pursue a career in the culinary space? And would you recommend them perhaps doing online courses, or should they go for the in-person classes for a more hands-on experience, since you're going to be using your hands quite a bit, most likely?
I can't imagine taking online courses if you want to go into the food business. So I guess I never have done that. So I don't think I would recommend that. It's a different world now than when I went to cooking school. So I understand why some people may want to do that or may only have that as an option. But there's nothing like feeling that pressure of that German chef breathing over your shoulder, teaching you something or telling you that you've done something wrong, and having someone else taste your food and look at it and let you know whether what you're doing is right or wrong. Whenever people, and a lot of people over the years have reached out to me saying they're interested in going into the food business, I almost always talk them out of it, to be honest. I think it's a hard way to make a living. Now, granted, I had a really great gig for a long time. I mean, don't get me wrong. I put my heart and soul into it, and I worked at probably as many hours as any restaurant chef. But it's not always easy to make like a solid career out of food. I did it for a really long time. Now I'm transitioning, yet again. So I'm facing different kinds of challenges, but you'll have to really, really love it, I think, and I'd say take a real hard look at what you want to do. A lot of people end up going into the marketing side of food because they actually realize they don't want to be in operations. And operations is tough. Operations is the same is getting up every day and like running a place, or, making a plate, helping to make a place run. And I think when it comes down to it, a lot of people think they want to go into the food business, but they're not necessarily prepared for all the work and the cleaning.
I would think if you're working in a kitchen or at a restaurant, it's very mundane. Like, I can't imagine doing the same thing 6 days a week for the rest of my life, because that's basically what these people are working in the restaurant spaces.
Yeah. And I think that was one of the reasons also, in addition to like, I knew that pressure of working the line and having to manage 25 different entrees at the same time was not for me. I also recognized that it was eventually basically the same thing over and over again, and you usually are like working on just a very small piece of it. That's why I really loved my path so much, because I worked on so many different interesting projects from soup to nuts, and got to work on a lot of with lots of different people. And it was always something different and a new challenge. So it was really great. And also I ended up doing a lot of traveling over the years too with Whole Foods, which was really great.
So they say if you love what you do, you're never going to work a day in your life. And it seems like over time, you've allowed yourself to work in the more creative side of the food industry. So you mentioned soup. During the pandemic, you decided to write a cookbook, SOUPified, right?
Right. Yes.
So where did the initial idea come from? There you go. See, and you can find it on Amazon.
Yes, on Amazon, or anywhere online, really.
So once we release this episode, what we'll do is we'll include like the Amazon link on the page. So we'll get some more into that once we wrap up here. But where did the idea come from to turn traditional dishes into soups? Did you think the idea itself was unique to sell? Because there are a lot of cookbooks out there, right?
Yes.
And I wouldn't necessarily oversaturated, but to publish another cookbook into that sphere, it could be very, very difficult
Absolutely.
to get off the ground. And what was the process like writing the book itself?
Well, first, I just want to back up and say I had, as a professional chef, you always want to write a cookbook. It's something that was on my mind for years, but I always let work and life get into the way. When I was in one of my smaller apartments, I'm like, oh, I should do a cookbook on like cooking in small spaces. Or I've always had so many ideas over the years, but never actually did anything with it. Then came 2020, and I had just like landed a really good client. Like it took me weeks to get that contract signed, and that was going to be like a really great long-term project for me. And then it just went away overnight. And so I had all this time, and we had to stay home. And I thought to myself, actually, I thought I would do an ebook, which at the time in my head, I was like, oh, I'll do an ebook, like thinking that's maybe a dozen recipes on a PDF that maybe I could sell on my website, which by the way, my website wasn't up and running yet, but I thought like that's another project for the pandemic. But okay, so then I should back up a little bit. The idea for SOUPified came from, I always wish I had like a better answer for this, but the truth is I have so many like creative juices, and there's so many ideas that I have in the air at one time. And going back to most of my career, we used to joke and say, at Whole Foods, innovation was like a 4-letter word, because it was just rammed into us over and over and over again, be innovative, do something different. And I was the one, I was at the spearheading a lot of those food initiatives. So we were always coming up with like different ways of looking at things. So developing recipes that are twists, that have twists and turns on the classics, has kind of always been my thing. And even with Manja with Michele, prior to writing SOUPified, those are a lot of the kind of dishes that I was posting on social media. And I think it was in January of 2020, looking back, I've realized this. I made a soup one day that was very akin to like a baba ganoush soup. I didn't really think of it that way. I'm like, oh, I'm going to make an eggplant tahini soup. And then after, kind of fast forward, I'm like, oh, that was sort of like a baba ganoush soup. And then I had made another soup that was similar. It was a soup version of a classic Sardinian pasta dish that didn't make it to the cookbook, but that I had done like 6 months prior. And I'm like, well, look, I've done a couple of actually soup recipes of non-soup dishes. So I thought that could be, now that is actually a cookbook that has never been out there before. Now, I'm not saying that, you scan the internet and you won't find a lasagna soup recipe out there. Obviously you're going to, but there is no other collection of recipes like that, like you will find in SOUPified, where it is really just a collection of soup recipes inspired by other dishes. And while it's not an Italian American cookbook, even though my brand Manja with Michele is, primarily Italian American, my Italian American roots absolutely come through, and you have ideas in there like chicken marsala soup, shrimp scampi soup, chicken scarpariello soup, eggplant parm soup, but then you also have Chinese egg roll soup and bacon cheeseburger soup and Philly cheesesteak soup. They're very hearty comfort food recipes. It was very au courant, like very much on point with what was going on during the pandemic and everyone staying home and cooking a lot of comfort food dishes. I started the cookbook in April and it got released in November, right after Thanksgiving. So it was still very much in the heart of, the pandemic, the COVID-19 pandemic. And the process was not a process, again, that I would recommend. Don't follow what I did, because I didn't really think of a printed, cookbook from the get-go. I thought of like an e-cookbook, but as I moved along in the process and I started brainstorming ideas and I wanted to come up with like 20 ideas, well, I came up with like 100 ideas in normal Michele fashion. I can't like do anything small. So then I'm like, oh, maybe, I could make this a little bit bigger. And then someone told me about the concept of print on demand with Amazon. And I think because it made it so relatively easy for me to do it that way, I just went ahead and did an actual printed cookbook. I mean, I still had to hire a designer, but other than hiring a designer, I did everything myself, the editing and all the photos and obviously all the writing and the recipe testing and everything. So that's my story on the cookbook. What else can I tell you about it?
No, it's great. Everybody should go check it out. You post some great videos on your Instagram of
Thank you.
those soups, which are pretty awesome. So for me, as Joe would know, in our friend group, and maybe beyond a lot, I'm known as the food guy. I do food reviews, post short clips on social media, on my Instagram at Nick's Food and Stuff. So I'll go to buffets or other food events and do the reviews of the stuff. So I know that it takes a lot of effort just to do those with the video editing that I do, and of course the filming them. But with your brand, Mangia with Michele, what is the process like to balance your social media and to promote your work? And does certain content or maybe certain foods do better, perform better on social media than others?
That's a really good question. And I feel like it's changing. And I was even just thinking about that this morning as I looked on YouTube, and I'm like, gee, I should be posting YouTube shorts like out of the blue. I'm like, maybe that's because then I just learned about YouTube shorts not that long ago. It's hard because as a food blogger, which is really the ultimate goal here, is to get a thriving food blog, which mine is not really that old and it's still very young, and I'm learning a lot about SEO, and I struggle with getting content up. But the ultimate goal for me of social media is to drive the audience to the website. And social media, especially, like the Instagram platform, is very unpredictable. So you have that balance, you're kind of struggling with that balance of how much time do I put into making this like really successful versus how much time do I spend on creating content for my website and other initiatives. I mean, like I said, I'm a food writer. I have other places that I'm writing recipes for, whether it's brands or, Italian American magazines or whatnot, versus not just posting pictures, but like putting together reels and other videos. And I mean, I struggle with it, and I don't think I always do it the right way. I think that sometimes I spend too much time on things that aren't going to yield me as much, and it's constantly trying to figure that out. The way the world is right now, in that the world that I'm in, you kind of have to be great at everything, but you can't be great at everything. So you have to pick one or two things. So I'm trying to focus right now on the website, on working with brands, and and I guess you'd say Facebook and Instagram, and dabble in some of the others. I mean, I have aspirations to have a podcast of my own and to also do YouTube videos, but I also realize I can't do that on my own. And I'm just not in a position yet to bring on a team, but I hope to at some point.
If given the opportunity to cook for any celebrity or athlete, who would you want to cook for, and what would you cook for them?
Gosh, that's a really good question. I mean, I have to say, even though he's passed, it's got to be Anthony Bourdain. I loved him. I loved his approach. I loved the way he talked about food. I loved the way that he, interacted with all the people that he would see in his travels. And what I loved about him is he was always like complimentary. Even if something wasn't his favorite, he would never be like super critical, at least on screen, and was always like very gracious.
Fair enough. All right. So I'm assuming
him and Jerry Seinfeld.
Jerry Seinfeld.
Hey,
I love
what
Jerry
would you
Seinfeld.
cook Jerry
What would I
Seinfeld?
make for Jerry Seinfeld? I have no idea, because let me think about this. Because he seems to be, he's probably like a very, very picky eater. If he's out there listening, you got to let us know what you like. But what would I make for Jerry Seinfeld? Definitely not cereal. Even though he would probably like that. And I would have to be something really basic. Maybe like a chicken parm or a chicken cutlet, something like that.
I feel like Jerry Seinfeld's probably like a grilled chicken, like with like arugula and mayonnaise sandwich type of guy. Something like, it's pretty simple.
Yeah,
I actually saw
right.
Jerry Seinfeld once at the Brooklyn Diner in Manhattan. My office was upstairs and he was sitting in there. I don't know. He's probably eating some sort of sandwich if I had
Yeah.
to guess, but I didn't bother him to look at him. But
I actually met him once. It was so random. Not this has anything to do with what we're talking about, but it was back when I lived in Switzerland and I was traveling in Spain with my sister who had come over to visit. We got to the Sevilla airport early, which is south of Spain. It was an empty, tiny airport. We got there, it's too early to check in. So we're sitting there basically in the middle of the airport with our bags. I go into the restroom. I come back out. My sister's like, oh my God, Jerry Seinfeld just walked into the men's room. There's a
Wow.
lot more to the story, but essentially me and my sister ended up having a whole like 5-minute conversation with him in the south of Spain in 1997. It was so
the
silly.
height of his popularity.
It was it was right before his last season of Seinfeld. And yeah, we have a picture and everything to prove it. He was a nice guy.
All right, so we'll take your word for it. What, Michelle, what are your favorite dishes to cook? And what are the dishes that when you have to cook them, you're like, oh, I can't deal with this. It takes me too long. I don't like this to do it.
You have really good questions. Definitely pasta as a category is my favorite to cook. And within that category, the slow, long cooked ragouts. I love like really tender. I love like braising and slow cooking meats until they are fork tender and falling apart, and then like incorporating them into a pasta dish. I'd say that's one of my favorite things to do. I really hate chopping herbs. I know that's actually not a cooking thing, but it is my very least favorite thing to do in the kitchen. And you kind of can't, get around it. You always got to use fresh herbs, and it's just a bear.
What are your least favorite holidays to cook for? And you can give us your favorite as well, but I'm really more interested in the least favorite.
Least favorite holidays to cook for? Gosh. Maybe some of the summer holidays, like the barbecues and whatnot. I'd rather just go to someone's house and like do a grill, like, where they're grilling and have something super simple. And that was the other question, the
Your
favorite?
favorite holiday to cook for?
Definitely Thanksgiving. Because
I was gonna think that would be the least favorite.
no, it is all
Yeah,
about
'cause
the
it's a
food.
lot.
And it's a lot, but I like love every dish.
Okay.
And it's really, yeah, it's a challenge, but I've narrowed it down to like the best dishes that I like to make every year. And it's just so great. Yeah.
So when you're creating a new dish,
Yes.
what is the trial and error process like? And when you experiment, you know what to look out for, you know what to taste for. So when you do experiment and you're looking for essentially other people to test a new original dish, whose taste buds do you trust more? Your family or your friends?
I would probably trust the taste. Depends what the recipe is, to be honest. But perhaps I guess first of all, I almost never do this. I should say I did do this with my cookbook, and I did have every recipe tested with a selection of family and friends, and I had very specific parameters for them and questionnaire and everything for them to fill out. I'd say my family, if it were a more Italian American home style dish, and if it were something maybe more professional or more little innovative, I probably wouldn't say my family. I'd probably say my friends that have been maybe a little bit more exposed to, more innovative kinds of dishes. And the process of trial and error is I plan out recipes like ad nauseum before I actually go in the kitchen and make them. Like I really do. Like for every recipe, for example, in the cookbook, SOUPified, I really thought through like in detail, okay, what is the dish that I am basing this recipe on? For example, Chinese egg roll. So therefore, like, what are all the flavors? I list out all the ingredients. I decide whether it needs to be a brothy soup or a thickened soup. If it needs to be thickened, how's it going to be thickened? Does it need to be creamy? Does it need to be pureed or not pureed? And I will write out the recipe almost as if I had made it, but without making it, and think it through every step so much so that I will not have to make it again. And rarely do I ever actually have to make a recipe twice. And I just think that comes with experience and a whole career of developing recipes like over and over and over again. You just get a good idea of how things go together and what the seasoning should be like. And I'm not saying everything is perfect, but usually if something doesn't turn out right, either I just abandon the idea, or I will make it one more time, but I don't like to do that.
So Michelle, are you someone who pretty much you're cooking for yourself every day, or are you someone who likes to go out and try different places?
I'd say I'm half and half. I love to go out. I think, I just can't spend my entire spend a ton of money on going out.
Right.
But I love to go out to restaurants. I love to try out new places. I love to support local places, but I also love to cook at home. So I cook at home a lot for sure, because it's more economical, and I always am cooking for the recipes that I'm developing, whether it's my website or working with brands. So I have a lot of food, and I also give a lot of food away, to be honest. So it's good to be living near me.
All right, Jack, you're gonna have to move more south in Jersey. I know you're up there in Jersey City right now, but there's a lot of food for you to be had. So I like your mug there, pizza, pizza, pizza.
I actually sell this. This is one of my designs. Pizza,
Oh,
pasta, parm, discuss.
very nice, very nice. So Michelle, what's for dinner tonight?
I was going out to dinner tonight. My plans got changed. I got canceled on. So what am I going to make tonight? I think I am going to make a salad. I've got some smoked salmon. I have some tomatoes, onions. I think I'm going to do like a salad with smoked salmon and avocado. Nothing super interesting, but it is kind of a nice warm day. So
All right.
that's what I feel like.
Enjoy, enjoy. So in your life or your career, what would you say is your moment? What I mean by that is a time or place where you wanted to pursue something, you asked somebody for advice. They said, Michelle, don't do that. It's horrible. It's not going to work out. You were like, you know what? I'm going to do it anyway. And ultimately, you will see why it is that I'm right.
Wow, I feel like this is a job interview. That is a very thought-provoking question. And I guess I'd have to go back to, I'm sure it's happened many times, but what sticks out to me right now is when I was thinking about going to Switzerland for the international exchange program. And I was, encouraged to speak to my current managers and partners, as I was applying for that program. And a number of them said to me, like, why do you want to do that? If you do that, you're going to get completely off track. You're never going to be able to come back and be back on, this senior manager, partner track. You don't want to leave New York. Don't do it. So that was one instance. And actually the second one, now that I think about it, I was working in a hotel restaurant part-time while I was still in cooking school, just to get the hours, because you needed to work. You always need to work in order to get X amount of hours per week. And when I found out about this company, Fresh Fields Whole Foods Market, which is where I ended up applying to get a part-time job. And then, the rest of the story. So I went in to tell the chef, who was very, the chefs that were like the big toque, it was very formal, very high-end restaurant. And I went in to talk to him. He's like, he could tell that I was gonna like, he's like, you're leaving, aren't you? I'm like, yes. I'm like, I'm giving you my notice. He's like, well, where are you gonna go? I said, well, I'm gonna go work for Whole Foods Market. He's like, what are you gonna learn there? It was so condescending. I remember the conversation so vividly. We were actually in an elevator. What are you gonna learn there? I said, well, I guess I'm gonna learn about retail food. That was my answer. And obviously that was a good move for me as well.
Motivated you.
Doesn't it always motivate you when someone kind of poo-poos your idea?
Sure, absolutely. Good point. Michelle, we thank you for your time. We really appreciate this. Last question from me, because Nick loves when I ask this question. Believe it or not, I do like astrology So I always close this out by asking the astrology sign of all the guests that we have on. So what is your sign?
What sign do you think I am?
Wow, nobody's ever put me on the spot. I'm just gonna take a stab at this. If I'm right, I'm right. If I'm wrong, I'm wrong. Virgo.
No, but you're close. I am an earth sign, Capricorn.
There you go.
That would be my guess.
Yeah,
And
because you exhibit the qualities of an earth sign. But so we've had Capricorns on with us in the past, and I don't know if Nick recalls me saying this, but Capricorn people are remarkably career-oriented people, right? And it doesn't matter if you're man or woman. There's that quality to them, and usually they always get to the top of whatever field that they're in, right? So that it works to your favor. And yes, you do exhibit the qualities of an earth sign. So I had 3 guesses there.
what is your sign?
I am a Cancer,
Oh, very nice. Okay.
and
So
Nick is a Gemini.
okay. So
Those
I mean,
Geminis, you got to watch out
I
for.
was about to say, don't you? I need to look out for Nick then.
Yeah, look out for me if we're both at a buffet. Get out of my way.
I've never seen somebody who, when we're out, can eat like Nick can. I've seen him out finish whole pizza pies to himself. When we went to Las Vegas back in October of last year, we hit a couple of buffets, and you should have seen the way he was polishing his plate. So, like I said at the beginning, I've been fortunate enough to, be in your presence and to watch you record the show that you did, and you made food that night, and everything was tremendous, and the meatballs that night were outrageous. So I'm hoping one day that we can get together in the future, and Nick will actually be there this time, and he can actually, try some of your food.
I would love that. I would love that. Let's make it happen.
Sounds good. Michele, once again, thank you. We appreciate your time. What we do here is we give our guests the last word. So you do have some things to share and promote, but if you have anything else, by all means, go ahead. Thank you again.
Thank you. Well, first of all, thank you for inviting me onto your show. I'm really appreciative to be your first food person, your entry into the food world. And yeah, to everyone who's listening out there, please follow me on social media. mangiawithmichele.com is my handle, and mangiawithmichele.com is my website. You can sign up for my mailing list, and that's Michele with 1 L. And please check out my cookbook and my products on my website. And I guess that's it. Hope to see you out there in the social media world.
All right. Thank you so much, Michele. I appreciate your time. That's going to do it here for this episode of You Know I'm Right. For our very special guest, Michele, my co-host, Joe. I am Nick, and this has been You Know I'm Right.